In the dark, early hours of March 8, 2014, a routine red-eye flight turned into the greatest aviation mystery of our time. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, a Boeing 777-200ER, departed Kuala Lumpur carrying 239 people on board, and then simply vanished. No distress call, no warning. One moment it was cruising normally, the next it was gone from radar, leaving the world grasping for answers. Flight MH370 was bound for Beijing, a journey that should have taken about 6 hours. But less than an hour after takeoff, all contact was lost. Despite one of the largest searches in aviation history, the airplane and its passengers seem to have disappeared without a trace. Years later, the full truth remains elusive, shrouded by ocean depths, incomplete evidence, and haunting questions. This is the story of MH370, an enduring enigma that continues to baffle investigators and fuel speculation. Prepare to delve into the timeline, the investigations, the theories, and the unsettling, unanswered questions surrounding this chilling mystery. Shortly after midnight on March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, MH370, lifts off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport, bound for Beijing. On board are 227 passengers and 12 crew members, representing 14 nationalities, the majority Chinese. Commanding the flight is Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a veteran pilot, alongside First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid on the final leg of his training. The Boeing 777 jetliner climbs into the night sky, cruising uneventfully for about 40 minutes. At 1:19 a.m. local time, as MH370 transitions from Malaysian to Vietnamese airspace over the South China Sea, air traffic control radios the cockpit. Captain Zahari responds calmly, "Good night, Malaysian 370. These words, a standard sign-off, would be the final heard from MH370. Minutes later, at 1:21 a.m., the plane's transponder, which relays identification and altitude to controllers, is inexplicably switched off. On radar screens in Kuala Lumpur and Ho Chi Minh City, MH370 simply blips out without a distress call or any signal of trouble. The scheduled check-in with Vietnamese ETC never occurs. It's as if the aircraft has suddenly ceased to exist. But MH370 had not crashed, at least not yet. Malaysian military radar picked up an unidentified blip that same night, moving in an unexpected path. Instead of continuing northeast to Beijing, the plane turned sharply west. It crossed back over the Malay Peninsula, flew near Penang Island, and then headed northwest into the Andaman Sea. At 2:22 a.m., this blip, later confirmed to be MH370, vanished from military radar about 200 nautical miles northwest of Penang, Malaysia, over the open ocean. In a span of 1 hour, MH370 had deviated wildly off course, flying into darkness without communication. Unknown to air traffic controllers at the time, Flight 370 continued flying for hours after it dropped off radar. The aircraft's satellite communication link, which had been silent, was re-established at 2:25 a.m. From that point onward, MH370 periodically pinged a geostationary satellite operated by Inmarsat, not with positional data, but with automated electronic handshakes. These hourly signals indicated the plane was still powered and flying south into the Indian Ocean. Ground stations received 6 subsequent pings, the last incomplete handshake at 8:19 a.m. Investigators later calculated that by then, the Boeing 777 would have exhausted its fuel. Sometime shortly after 8:19 a.m., over 7 hours into its journey, MH370 is believed to have plunged into the remote southern Indian Ocean, thousands of miles from its intended route. The timeline of MH370's disappearance is marked by eerie silence and subtle electronic whispers. There were a few strange anomalies as well. In the days after the flight's loss, it emerged that 2 passengers had boarded using stolen passports, raising suspicions of foul play. They were later identified as Iranian asylum seekers with no terrorist links, and this lead was deemed a coincidence rather than a conspiracy. Another curious detail, Malaysian investigators reported that the first officer's mobile phone was detected by a cell tower near Penang around the time the plane was over the area. It appeared Farik's phone was switched on, perhaps even attempting a call, as the jet flew low enough for a brief signal pickup. Why would a pilot turn on his phone mid-flight? Was it a sign of distress or an attempt to communicate during an unfolding crisis? We still don't know. What we do know is that by sunrise, Flight MH370 had vanished from the skies, leaving behind a trail of timeline data, but no immediate answers. When MH370 failed to contact air traffic control or land in Beijing on March 8th, alarms were raised. In the initial hours, confusion reigned. Malaysia Airlines announced that the flight was missing and that the last contact with the plane was at 2:40 a.m., an incorrect time later revised to 1:21 a.m. Precious hours were lost before authorities realized the aircraft had doubled back over Malaysia. A massive search and rescue operation was launched in the South China Sea and Gulf of Thailand, where the plane was first thought to have crashed. Dozens of ships and aircraft from multiple nations combed those waters, frantically scouring for any sign of debris. At the peak of efforts, 26 countries were involved in the search, from Southeast Asian neighbors to the United States and Australia. Early hopes were raised and dashed as oil slicks and flotsam spotted from the air turned out unrelated to the missing Boeing. It wasn't until a week later that investigators faced a stark reality. MH370 had flown off course for hours. On March 15th, Malaysia's Prime Minister announced that satellite data from Inmarsat showed the plane's last signals placed it along one of two vast corridors, a northern arc stretching towards Central Asia and a southern arc across the Indian Ocean. With no evidence the plane traveled north, it would have been seen by radar of countries en route. The focus shifted firmly to the remote southern Indian Ocean. This meant the search area moved thousands of miles away, off the west coast of Australia, some of the most isolated ocean on the planet. An international team led by Australia took charge of the Indian Ocean search. For weeks, military and civil aircraft, including the U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon and Australia's P-3 Orions, overflew the waves, and naval ships deployed sonar equipment listening for the pings of the aircraft's black box beacons. There were fleeting glimmers. In early April 2014, ships detected a series of underwater acoustic signals that resembled black box pings, sparking optimism. A concentrated seabed search was conducted in that area, but those signals ultimately proved inconclusive and no wreckage was found there. In May 2014, the operation entered a new phase, an extensive underwater search using sophisticated sonar mapping of the seabed. Over the next 2.5 years, survey vessels painstakingly scanned 120,000 square kilometers of ocean floor, an area roughly the size of Pennsylvania, looking for any trace of the Boeing 777. It was the largest and most expensive underwater search in aviation history, costing about $150 million, funded by Malaysia, Australia, and China. The terrain was rugged, with trenches and volcanic ridges some 4,000 to 6,000 meters deep. Month after month, sonar contacts turned up random shipping containers, volcanic rocks, even an old shipwreck, but no airplane. By January 2017, after nearly 3 fruitless years, the official search was suspended. The ocean had guarded its secret well. And yet, clues did eventually emerge, carried by the currents to distant shores. On July 29, 2015, a lone fragment of an aircraft wing washed up on the beach of Réunion Island, off Madagascar. Inspectors quickly identified it as a flaperon from a Boeing 777, and serial numbers confirmed it came from MH370. This discovery, 16 months after the disappearance, was the first physical evidence that MH370 had indeed ended in the Indian Ocean. In subsequent years, over 30 pieces of suspected debris were recovered from coastlines of the western Indian Ocean, from Madagascar, Mozambique, Tanzania, South Africa, and islands in between. However, only a handful could be conclusively proven to belong to MH370, including 2 wing flaps and part of the horizontal stabilizer. These debris pieces, weathered and broken, suggested a high-speed impact with the sea. Investigators noted, for instance, that the flaps were likely not deployed, hinting that the aircraft was not configured for a gentle landing, but rather crashed uncontrolled. Malaysian authorities, with help from international agencies, carried out a thorough investigation into the disappearance. In July 2018, Over 4 years after MH370 vanished, Malaysia's government released a 495-page investigation report. The report did not deliver the closure the world had hoped for. It concluded that the aircraft's diversion from its route was likely a deliberate act. Someone in the cockpit manually turned off systems and steered the plane off course. However, the report could not determine who was responsible or why, stopping short of pinning the blame on any specific party. The investigators examined the backgrounds of all 239 on board, including the pilots, and found no evidence of terrorism or personal problems that could definitively explain such an action. They also highlighted lapses in air traffic control, such as confusion and delays in initiating search and rescue, and issued safety recommendations that, frustratingly, they concluded that without locating the wreckage and black boxes, they could not definitively determine what happened on MH370. In essence, the official stance became mystery unsolved. The lack of a clear explanation and the failure to find the main wreckage fueled public anguish and speculation. Families of the missing pressed for answers, at times accusing governments of withholding information or mishandling the search. Why did Malaysian authorities take so long, over 4 days, to acknowledge that their military radar had tracked the plane flying west? Could more have been done if information had been shared earlier? These questions underscored what many saw as gaps and inconsistencies in the investigation. Over the years, independent researchers and even private companies have continued the quest. In 2018, a U.S. seabed exploration firm, Ocean Infinity, conducted a new search on a no-find, no-fee basis, scanning another 112,000 square kilometers of ocean floor, but again came up empty-handed. As of 2023, talks of yet another renewed search have emerged, showing that the world has not given up on ultimately finding MH370. With hard evidence scarce, numerous theories, some official, some speculative, have arisen to explain MH370's fate. What could cause a modern airliner with experienced pilots to so abruptly veer off course and vanish? Investigators and experts have pondered many scenarios, from the mundane to the wildly conspiratorial. 1. Mechanical failure/accidental causes. One possibility is that MH370 suffered a sudden catastrophic failure or onboard crisis that incapacitated the crew. For example, a fire in the cargo hold, perhaps sparked by the lithium-ion batteries the plane carried, or a rapid decompression could have knocked out communications and forced the pilots to turn back toward Malaysia seeking an emergency landing. Proponents of this theory point to incidents like Swissair 111, fire, or Helios 522, crew hypoxia, as analogies. Perhaps the pilots were heroes trying to save the plane, but were overcome by smoke or lack of oxygen, leaving the aircraft flying on autopilot until it ran out of fuel. This ghost flight, hypoxia scenario gained traction early on, the idea that everyone on board fell unconscious while the aircraft silently cruised into the sea. However, skeptics note that the deliberate navigational maneuvers, like the sharp turn west and later southerly course, don't fit a purely accidental or uncontrolled scenario. It would be a remarkable coincidence for an unpiloted plane to navigate such a complex path. 2. Pilot involvement. Intentional diversion. Unfortunately, one of the leading theories is a dark one, that one of the pilots, most likely Captain Zahari, intentionally took the plane on a deviating route and caused it to disappear in a murder-suicide plot. This theory is supported by several pieces of indirect evidence. The flight path seems carefully planned to avoid radar detection, even skimming the edge of national airspace boundaries. Key communications were disabled at precise moments, suggesting knowledge and intent. In a chilling detail, data recovered from Captain Zahari's home flight simulator showed he had practiced a flight route deep into the southern Indian Ocean just weeks before the incident. The simulated route wasn't identical to MH370's, but it was eerily similar in direction, flying northwest, then due south into open. This doesn't prove intent, but it raises eyebrows. Was the captain rehearsing? Authorities have been careful with their language. The Malaysian investigation team stated they could not find any evidence of psychological instability or suicidal intent in either pilot's background. Yet in private, Malaysian and international officials have acknowledged the possibility. Australia's former Prime Minister Tony Abbott claimed that Malaysian leaders confided early on that they suspected a pilot murder-suicide scenario. Malaysia's own Prime Minister at the time, Najib Razak, later said that while they never had conclusive proof, they did not rule out that the captain deliberately downed the plane. Motive, of course, is the great unknown. Was it an act of depression or personal crisis? A political statement, Zahari was rumored to be upset by a controversial court verdict that day in Malaysia? We simply don't know. The pilot's suicide theory remains plausible to many experts, but without a definitive smoking gun, it's not officially confirmed. A grim shadow of suspicion. 3. Hijacking or illegal interference. Another category of theories posits that someone else on board might have hijacked the plane. Could a passenger or even a stowaway have stormed the cockpit and taken control? If so, for what purpose? No terrorist group ever claimed responsibility, which is unusual if it were a classic terror attack. Initial suspicion fell on those 2 passengers with stolen passports, but they were found to have no links to terror. What about the rest of the passengers? All were investigated and cleared by Malaysian police. Still, scenarios have been floated. Perhaps hijackers commandeered MH370 to use it for a later purpose. There's speculation the plane could be stolen and hidden to be used in a future attack, though no evidence materialized. Or an individual on board had a personal motive. For instance, there were a handful of flight engineers and tech experts flying that night. Could one of them have had the skill and intent to take over? A related idea is sabotage, that someone, not necessarily on the plane, hacked or interfered with the aircraft systems remotely, a cyber attack. While there is no proven case of a commercial airliner being taken over from the ground, MH370's bizarre trajectory led some to imagine a hacker infiltrating the flight controls or a rogue agent feeding false coordinates to the navigation system. Thus far, this remains in the realm of techno-thriller fiction. Boeing and aviation authorities say such a remote hijack would be nearly impossible with 2014 technology. For military/cover-up theories, the profound lack of answers has also given rise to theories involving government cover-ups or military action. One speculation is that MH370 was accidentally or intentionally shot down by a country's defense forces, and that this truth was covered up to avoid scandal. For instance, could the plane have been mistaken for a hostile aircraft during a military exercise? Notably, there were training operations in the region at the time. A variant suggests MH370 approached a sensitive facility, such as the U.S. military base on Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, and was shot down or forced to land there. Indeed, Diego Garcia figures in several conspiracy narratives. Some claim the plane was secretly landed there and the passengers detained, or alternatively that the U.S. shot the plane down out of fear it was going to be used as a weapon. There is zero evidence supporting these claims, and the U.S. government has repeatedly denied any involvement with MH370. Malaysia's government also stated there was no indication the plane was shot down by any known military. Nonetheless, the shoot-down hypothesis persists in the shadows of internet forums, often citing the lack of debris in early searches as evidence of a cover-up done. Another theory that borders on espionage: could MH370 have been hijacked electronically by a state actor? One outlandish idea suggested a Russian clandestine operation. With the Crimea crisis unfolding in March 2014, a theory posited that Russian agents hijacked MH370 to divert world attention by flying it to Kazakhstan, for example. This was largely regarded as far-fetched and has no supporting proof, but it shows how even geopolitics got entangled in MH370 speculation. 5. Other wild theories. The void of solid information in the wake of MH370's disappearance led to truly bizarre ideas as well. These range from the paranormal to science fiction. For a time, social media buzzed with the notion that the plane could have been abducted by aliens or swept into a black hole, an expression of how unbelievable it seemed for an airliner to completely disappear in this day and age. CNN famously even discussed the black hole idea, illustrating the desperation for explanations. Needless to say, such theories are not taken seriously by investigators. Others wondered if the plane might have been hijacked by a technologically advanced group and hidden in a remote location, undetected on the ground somehow, essentially a massive cover-up operation. To date, no credible evidence supports these fantastic scenarios. They underscore, however, the cultural impact of MH370. It was as if the event was so unprecedented that some people felt only the extraordinary or supernatural could explain it. Each theory about MH370 comes with its own set of supposed motives and implications. If it was mechanical failure or crew incapacitation, it points to a tragic accident, perhaps one that could prompt safety changes if we knew what it was. If it was the pilot, it raises painful questions about mental health screening and what drives a pilot to commit such an unthinkable act. If it was hijacking, we wonder what the perpetrators sought: ransom, spectacle, or a target that was never reached. The silence from any would-be hijackers is hard to reconcile. The notion of a cover-up or military action, if it were true, would mean a grave injustice to the families and a scandal of international proportion. But again, no concrete evidence has emerged to substantiate those claims. In the end, officials lean toward a deliberate human act, most likely by someone in the cockpit, as the leading hypothesis. In 2016, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau stated that the available evidence, especially the flight path and system shutoff, suggested this was no. Many aviation experts concur that the simplest explanation is pilot action. Yet because we lack definitive proof, MH370's fate remains open to debate, fertile ground for conspiracy theories and informed analysis alike. It is a mystery at the intersection of technology, psychology, and geopolitics, which is why it has gripped the world's attention like few other air disasters. The unanswered questions. After all the data analyses, searches, and theories, MH370 remains an unsolved puzzle. For every piece of the story we think we understand, there are critical questions that remain unanswered. Who was in control of the aircraft? Was it one of the pilots acting with malign intent, or were they incapacitated while the plane flew on autopilot? Could a third party have taken over? We still don't know definitively who guided MH370 in those fateful hours after 1:21 a.m. Why were the plane's transponder and communication systems turned off? This appears to have been a deliberate act, but what was the reason? To hide the plane's position during a hijack or rogue mission? Or was there an electrical fire that forced the crew to pull circuit breakers? The intent behind the silencing of MH370 is a mystery. What exactly happened in the cockpit in the moments after 1:19 a.m.? The timeline tells us when systems went dark and when the plane turned around, but the chain of events, possibly a struggle, an emergency, or a calculated operation, remains unknown. No Mayday call was ever heard. Why did MH370 deviate so far off course? If it was an accident or fire, why fly for hours in the wrong direction without seeking an airport? If it was deliberate, what goal was being pursued by flying to the emptiest stretch of ocean? The logic, or lack thereof, behind the route haunts investigators. Where is the main wreckage? Despite identified debris, the crash site of MH370 is still pinpointed only within a broad ocean swath. The fuselage, engines, and crucially the black boxes lie somewhere on the seabed. Without locating them, vital evidence about the flight's final moments remains out of reach. The ocean, it seems, is still hiding MH370's secrets. Why didn't anyone see or track the plane in real time? The aircraft traversed Malaysian and Thai airspace and later flew for hours over open ocean. How did it avoid triggering a stronger military response? Some radar data was not acted upon immediately, and some may never have been publicly released. This raises questions about air defense monitoring and transparency. Are there pieces of information being withheld? This is the uncomfortable question many families have asked. For instance, raw military radar records, more details from radar in neighboring countries, or additional satellite data. Could there be more out there that hasn't been shared? Officials insist all usable data has been analyzed, but in a case this vexing, suspicions of a cover-up linger in some minds. What was the motive? Perhaps the most vexing question if we assume human intervention. Why would someone do this? Without survivors or a perpetrator to tell the tale, we are left to speculate on motives, from suicide, political protest, revenge, to insanity or a criminal plot. Every theory about motive remains conjecture. These unanswered questions weigh heavily. Each one is a branch in the maze of the MH370 mystery. They also represent the pain points for the families of those aboard, the nagging uncertainties that make closure impossible. Experts have said that only the discovery of the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder could definitively answer most of these questions. Until then, we are left with educated guesses and uncomfortable voids in the narrative. MH370 is an anomaly in the age of global connectivity and surveillance, a sobering reminder that despite all our technology, a large airplane can still vanish and keep its truth hidden. Nearly a decade has passed since Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 disappeared, and the world is still haunted by its fate. In that time, family members have endured unimaginable heartache, caught between grief and the slim hope that one day they might learn what truly happened to their loved ones. Investigators, engineers, and amateur sleuths around the globe continue to puzzle over the data, refusing to let the trail go cold. The ocean's currents have carried pieces of the plane to distant shores, but the heart of the mystery lies somewhere in a vast underwater abyss, silent and unresolved. The MH370 tragedy has had a profound impact on aviation safety and how we think about tracking aircraft. Efforts have been made to improve real-time flight monitoring so that no jet can ever disappear in this manner again. But these technical advances do little to soothe the lingering eerie aura that surrounds MH370. To this day, it stands as one of aviation's greatest unsolved puzzles, a case with many clues and no final answer. The story has been the subject of documentaries, books, and endless debates, yet it remains an open case. Every few months, a new theory or a proposed new search makes headlines, proving that the world has not forgotten those 239 souls or their unfinished journey. In reflecting on MH370, one cannot escape an almost ghostly feeling. A modern airliner simply gone, leaving behind a wake of theories and sorrow. The loss of MH370 is not just a technical mystery, but a human one. Families without closure, a global community of aviation experts humbled by uncertainty, and a narrative that reads like a somber thriller with the last chapter missing. As we end this exploration of MH370's story, we are left with a poignant question that echoes into the silence. Will we ever know the truth? Perhaps one day the sea will give up the secrets of Flight 370, and the final mysteries will be resolved. Until then, MH370 remains an enigma, a dark tale of the unknown, reminding us how vast our world can be, both in its oceans and in the questions that lie unanswered. If you found this documentary compelling, don't forget to like this video to help more people discover the mystery of MH370. Subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the world's greatest unsolved cases. And tell us in the comments, what you think really happened to MH370? Your theory might just be the one that cracks the case.